this computer. I'm going to pause.
Good evening. Good evening, you all. Great to see this turnout for Katherine. Yes. Really, this is awesome. Not on? Okay. How's that? No? No? Nothing? Something. Okay. We'll trust that this works at some point. Some more. Hi. I'm Jim Burklow, pastor of United Church of Christ, Simi Valley. Our church is a progressive church. That means that we take the Bible seriously because we do not have to take it literally. And we believe that Jesus is about love. Like, really about love. And practicing that not just amongst ourselves, but in our wider sphere of society, with all that comes with that commitment. So, welcome to our church. Welcome to this evening. I am thrilled that Katherine is here. I heard her speak about 9 months ago in Santa Barbara. She was awesome. So we're just stoked that she's here with us tonight with a new book and to get us energized around addressing the whole issue of Christian nationalism and its effects on our country. It's also a global phenomenon, as we'll discuss. And really look forward to the conversation that this stimulates among us all. And I really hope that we take time afterwards to enjoy refreshments. Our church folks and the 805 Speakeasy team have brought some really good stuff. So enjoy that. And while you're enjoying that, meet each other. Because one of the things we hope happens from this evening is that people will get to know each other, learn about each other's involvements and commitments, and get involved in each other's organizations and in what each other are doing about the issues that matter to us that brought us here tonight. And Laura Tribble from 805 Speakeasy, which put this together. Yay, 805. Take it from us.
Wish my family was here to see that. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. There's so many friendly faces in here that I know already, and thank you to everybody I don't know who came. This event is important to me because of things that have happened here locally. And I don't know, some of you may be aware, some of you not. But 3 years ago, there was a newspaper dropped on our porch, and it happened to be called the Caneo Guardian. And some of you know it. So, long story short, I knew it was trouble right when I opened it. I was kind of excited. I'm like, oh, the Guardian, and I opened it up, and no, it wasn't a good paper. It was all right-wing propaganda set to cause chaos and destruction in our own school district. And that paper came straight from Godspeak Calvary Church in Newbury Park that we found out later. They later admitted it. They denied it at first. But I just want to introduce, with that story in mind, just hold tight, I want to introduce Katherine Stewart. She is an award-winning investigative journalist and author. She has covered the rise of religious right as a political force for 16 years. And her latest book is Money, Lies, and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. So please, Katherine, come on up. So, and I want to introduce our other panelist, Angie Gavant. She's from Glendale. She actually does a lot of work in that school district to help with their own. Glendale's had its own extremism problems, and they successfully fought it off, just like the Caneo Valley did. And then I'd like to introduce Jess Safani Franco. I've actually never said your last name out loud. I just read it. Jess was raised in a fundamental Christian nationalist construct. She left her childhood church and she earned her MA in religious studies in 2013. She has been studying Christian nationalism for 20 years. And I just wanted to say, I forgot Angie. Angie runs, is it GUSD or Glendale? Okay, GUSD Parents, yes. And so my story about the newspaper, I just wanted to lead up because Katherine got started. She was an author before, but she got started on the religious right and Christian nationalism because she learned there was a good news club in her neighborhood. And that brought her into this world. So, and without further ado, we can start with our conversations. You guys have mics?
No, but I've got a big voice.
Hello, hello, hello.
You guys can share.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Catherine. I think, we would love to just dig into your story a little bit to start and what it was like, starting with the Good News Club and how it led you into this world and path.
Thank you so much for the question. I just want to thank all of you for being here, and we're going to get into some pretty heavy stuff, but I want to start off on a note of hope and encouragement. I think a gathering like this, bringing different groups of folks together who are really concerned about our democracy and our democratic institutions and constitutional principles is really exciting. And there are gatherings like these happening all over the country. I'm really seeing a lot of people waking up, who haven't really been aware of what's happening. So 16 years ago when I started down this path, and certainly 20 years ago when you were sort of living in it, there are a lot of folks sort of outside of the movement who weren't really aware that it was happening. I remember that the big story in religion journalism at the time was the rise of the so-called nuns, and Obama was president, and I started talking about this stuff, and people thought I was overreacting. Let's just put it that way. But I wasn't. I was living in Santa Barbara. A Good News Club came to my daughter's public elementary school. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's an after-school program targeting children in the very earliest years of learning, kids who are too young to read, who can't make a distinction between a program in their school and one that's sponsored by their school. They think if it's in their school, it's being taught by adults, it must be what the school wants them to believe. So, I'm sorry, do you mind if we take photographs afterwards? Is that really okay? Do you mind? It's just really distracting. Sorry about that. I get that deer in headlights thing. Sorry about that. So they came to our school, and we were in the same district as Westmont College, an evangelical college. And the Westmont parents offered the Good News Club leaders free space in the evangelical church next door to the school. Like literally next door, free, same time, and the Good News Club leaders declined. And they insisted on being in the public schools. Their materials were telling kids that if they didn't believe in Jesus, they were going to go to hell. And they were using kids attending the clubs to recruit their peers by giving them points or prizes or even candy. And I just thought, okay, what do my evangelical friends from Westmont College know that I don't? Why don't they want them to be in our public school? And what do the Good News Club leaders really believe? And most importantly, how is it legal and possible for them to be in the public schools given the separation of church and state? So it was clear to me right from the very beginning that this is a group that wasn't just driven by local personalities, it was a part of a national network that had placed thousands of these clubs in public elementary schools. They were deriving benefit from a vast sort of far-right legal ecosphere that we're going to talk about more later. And they were connected to very, powerful policy groups, networking organizations, and the like. They were calling our public schools the mission fields and other people's children the harvest. And so I really, it was clear to me that the Good News Club was one small part of a larger war on public education. And the war on public education was just one small part of a much larger war on the foundations of America as a modern constitutional democracy. So that's sort of what got me started. And I also, I trained as an investigative journalist, and I always figured you can't really know what's happening unless you're in the room, where they're not just, the leaders aren't just on CNN talking to the general populace, but when they're talking to one another, when they're talking to their people. The first event I went to was the National Convention of the Child Evangelism Fellowship, and the hostility to public education it just astonished me. It was hard for me to grasp. They were placing their clubs in public elementary schools, and yet they seemed to hate public schools. They described them as evil places. They said, we're going to knock down all the doors, or even we're going to kick in the doors. They described children aged 5 to 12 as strategic machinery for changing the culture. So that's sort of a longer version than I usually tell of how I got started. But that was my sort of inciting incident, I think.
Well, I think it's interesting that tracked through the Obama years and then obviously the first Trump administration, Biden to now, and your reporting has followed that and its sort of metastasization, which I think is where the current book takes off. So why did you choose those three words, money, lies, and God?
Money, because first, vast concentrations of wealth at the very tippy top of the economic ladder have destabilized the political system in some really interesting ways, and I'll get into that. Second, lies, because propaganda, conscious disinformation is another huge part of the story. And God, because I would say religious nationalism or Christian nationalism is the most important part, I would say most important part of the largest kind of I would say it's the most important framework for the largest part of this movement. It's a way to get the rank and file to vote a certain way. It's a kind of form of identity politics, really. It's a reactionary form of nationalism. It's who gets to properly count as American, who gets to properly belong in the country, and who doesn't. So when we talk about money, the movement derives enormous support from a sector of the plutocratic class. Look, America's a lot of very wealthy people, and only a sector of them are funding this movement, but the amounts of money are extraordinary. And here's the interesting thing. Some of the funders are evangelical, some are Protestant, some are Jewish, some are ultra-conservative Catholic, and some are kind of atheistic, even though they might adopt a kind of quasi-religious identity for strategic purposes. Religiously, they're all over the place. But what they're really after is economic policies that are going to benefit them. They're going to justify these massive upward concentrations of wealth that we've seen over the last few decades. Some of them say they want sort of libertarian or free market policies. They just want to let capitalism do its thing. At the same time, they're pursuing government, privileged contracts for their monopolistic businesses, government contracts, taxpayer support, and taxpayer subsidies. I'm thinking about Elon Musk, So some of them have, I would say, like the Wilkes brothers, for instance. You guys might be familiar with them because they helped fund Rob McCoy, who is a big sort of religious nationalist leader. But some of them, like Musk or Jeff Yass or even Barry Seid, and don't seem to have really religious goals in mind at all. And some of them really seem to adopt. The kind of good thing about being an investigative journalist is sometimes you write about people, and then their people around them will circle back. So, if you really wonder what does Betsy DeVos really value in her life, and then you Google Betsy DeVos's yachts, that's yachts with an S at the end of it, I don't know. you wonder what really motivates that lady. And there are others. I'm not implying that her people have, I won't go there. Different people around other different people have also have circled back. So that's the money piece of it. Oh, here's the other thing. So they're united, these funders, in this idea that they want to crush liberalism and they want to destroy what they call the administrative state, which is the features of an effective, functioning democratic government. But a lot of people are going to be hurt if you destroy a public administration subject to ethics rules. And this is where the lies comes in. The movement has bamboozled a large sector of the American public with conscious disinformation and propaganda. There's, Reawaken America, which I know, Laura, you've done a lot of work around, and Mike Flynn. There's also this kind of propaganda that says that government is always bad, never does anything right, and we need to shrink it so small we can drown it in a bathtub. I mean, you see what's happening now with Doge and cutting all these government services and government organizations. But we're finding out all the bad things that can happen when you have an absence of effective functioning government, right? Or a government that is really led for the benefit of the dear leader at the top and his cronies, a cronyistic, kleptocratic, corrupt government. And we see examples of this all around the globe, and it seems to be what our present dear leader is aiming for. So, and then of course, religious nationalism. So I mentioned Rob McCoy. I think a very, underappreciated feature of the movement, the Christian nationalist movement, is these hyper-political pastors who play an enormous role in spreading disinformation to the rank and file, shaping religion in a certain way, and turning out the rank and file to vote for hyper-conservative candidates that the movement favors. I actually saw Rob McCoy speak recently. I was at America Fest. I mean, even as they're doing this, they're actually redefining religion or trying to sort of highlight an ultra-conservative, ultra-reactionary form of the Christian faith and delegitimize any other form. So Rob McCoy was on a panel with a fellow named Lucas Miles, who's the head of Turning Point USA Faith. He's got a really big job in a very important organization. And he said, "I've made it my mission to eradicate wokeism from the American church." That would be your church. He said, he authored a book titled Woke Jesus, and then the subtitle is something like The Heresy Destroying the Christian Church. And what counts as heresy in his mind? Well, he named the social gospel, which is how a lot of people understand the gospel. He named the historical Jesus movement, liberation theology, and black liberation theology. And he said he's partnered with 3,500 other pastors to form a new Nicene Creed and Council, which will sort of establish the doctrines of true Christianity. So they see not just religious pluralism, but also liberal religion as very hostile to their agenda. I could talk about this forever, but I'm going to stop here.
Well, I think that as you were describing the funding landscape and the religious aspect, it did bring up a term that you coined that I think is extremely useful in understanding this landscape that includes both Christian nationalists and these far-right libertarians. And that term is reactionary nihilism. I did pull a quote from your book, but I'd love to hear you unpack that, and then I'm going to hand it over.
Okay, yeah, reactionary nihilism. So I think of nihilism as, I think of this movement as a sort of form of reactionary nihilism, is that it's better defined by what it wants to destroy rather than what it wants to create. And its leaders, by their actions, not just by their words, or more than just by their words, deny that there's really any inherent value in the world as it exists. I think they count as nihilists. And when they talk about what they want to create, it's always some fantasy based on an imaginary version of the past that never existed the way that they say it did, but it also includes elements of regressive social order. So you've got gender order, you've got implicitly or explicitly racial hierarchies. A lot of these movement leaders will deny, forever that they're racist, but just look at what they're doing. The anti-DEI push is just the same old, I would say, Jim Crow mentality. In a way, it's, unfortunately not consigned to history. So I put those words together, reactionary nihilism, because we see it playing out before our eyes. I mean, they told us what they were going to do. And now they're doing it. They're going to smash the administrative state. And they're just so intent on what they want to destroy and who they hate. They don't seem to have much of a care about the morning after. When they talk about the morning after, it's going to be America's somehow made great again, and everyone's going to be rich. And meanwhile, we're all looking at sort of economic, a cratering of our economy. Somebody coined a term I saw on Blue Sky, $2 Donnie. You know what I'm referring to?
So your book is amazing, and as I was reading it and going through it again today, I was really struck by the way that so many different movements work concentrically, but almost like a wheel. Like there's a common hub, but there are many spokes, and they all work together, and there's so many people and so many foundations that are intertwined, or they have the same founder and different funders. Can you elaborate a little bit on this beehive model that you've talked about?
Yeah, so Christian nationalism is not just an anti-democratic political ideology. It's also, I would say, a political phenomenon, or more explicitly, a political movement. And like any movement, it has various components, various features. Its power of this movement is in its deep organizational infrastructure. So it's leadership-driven. The agenda is not set by the rank and file, it's set by the leaders. And it's organization-driven. And you can group these different organizations into categories. And I'm going to throw out some names here. You guys have done a great job of with some of the graphics, but this is by no means comprehensive. Okay, so you've right-wing policy groups like the Family Research Council and the American Family Association and America First Policy Institute. You have think tanks like Heritage Foundation and the Heartland Institute and so many others. You have networking organizations like the Council for National Policy that bring together leaders of the different organizations with deep-pocketed funders, so they can, hobnob and get the funding that they need to pursue their agenda. And there are other networking organizations like ZICLAG, and there's networking organizations in different features of the movement. Part of the family also functions as a networking organization. Jeff Charlotte has written, for those of you familiar, he's written a wonderful book about the family. There are very sophisticated data initiatives like I360, which the Kochs have funded, and then Deep Root Analytica, and these other, and an organization that was previously known as United in Purpose and has sort of transformed in different ways over time. But the former head of United in Purpose, I became sort of obsessed with what they do, and I watched countless hours. I'm down the rabbit hole watching countless hours of video, and I found him on a Christian Christian TV show with Joni, and I don't remember the other guy's name. He died of COVID, unfortunately. But he said, this guy's name was Bill Dallas, and he said, we have 200 million voter files in our database. And we know what makes someone turn out to vote one way, and we know what makes them stay home. And they had these initiatives where they would capture all this information about you and me. Are you a member of NASCAR? Do you ever go to NASCAR? Do you have a fishing license? Do you have a gun at home? Have you ever signed a marriage equality or an anti-marriage equality petition? That kind of thing. And they sort of have profiles about people and what makes a person a likely voter for their cause. And then they're able to sort of funnel information into those people's ecosphere, their social media feeds, or their the kind of information sphere that they're getting on their phones or on their computers. So the data initiatives are very, very sophisticated, and they have even data initiatives that target pastors, so a pastor can see what percentage of his church voted in the last election, and even individual voter lookups. So they can see that a particular congregant didn't vote in the last election. You can imagine the conversations. Hey, Mrs. Jones, I see you didn't vote in the last election. Don't you know it's your biblical duty to vote to preserve life or whatever. So anyway, that's the data initiative. There's a far-right disinformation sphere that I described earlier. I would say the legal ecosphere includes organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom, which has an annual operating budget of over $100 million a year. Then groups like Pacific Justice Institute, Liberty Council, First Liberty, and others. That far-right legal ecosphere also includes the Federalist Society, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. Leonard Leo sort of built it up to where it is today, and it plays a really key role in finding and grooming and promoting far-right legal talent that will shape the courts. It's a really important feature of this movement because movement leaders want to impose a lot of policies on the population that are incredibly unpopular. And they know that, frankly, wouldn't do well if given to a Democratic vote. But they know if they can capture the courts, they can impose those policies on an unwilling public. So just one example, abortion rights or reproductive rights. Americans overwhelmingly support abortion rights in some form, including a majority of Republicans. But movement leaders have a kind of abortion has played a really special role in their movement because it's been a way to sort of unite their movement around a really kind of hardcore, uncompromising issue. They know if you can get people to vote on a single issue, you can control their vote. So they've sort of cultivated this sort of idea among the hardcore, the rank and file, that you have to vote this way. And so that remains a goal. I mean, they're not done after overturning Roe versus Wade. So they know that they can capture the courts, they can get that policy done. If you can get this case right now before the Supreme, they just heard oral arguments. It's called St. Isidore Academy versus Drummond. It's the right-wing legal organizations are behind a Catholic school that's a charter, and they want to get full taxpayer funding for this religious charter school, something that has been sort of prohibited in any interpretation of our Constitution for so many years, really since the founding of, I would say since like the 1840s, 1850s. And they know if they can, get that big win, then the money will flow to religious organizations without end. So again, it's a leadership-driven movement, not driven by the rank and file, and the leaders are setting the agenda. They're incredibly well-funded. Behind the religious nationalism, behind the disinformation, is a huge wave of plutocratic cash.
In your book, you talk about discovering the sort of epicenter of this movement in Southern California, which I know that I think many of us have experienced surprise amongst our peers that we are seeing such targeted assaults. And you traced, a lot of the money and spending to Joan Lindsay. And I think some of us have traced another funder, Kim Bengard, who lives in Orange County and has a huge industrial and agricultural business behind her. We pulled these slides that show just some of the networking, some of the organizations that are funded by the foundation that Kim Bengard is the president of. And it illustrates the scope of, I think, those organizations that you were describing and the various factions from legal to policy. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about, what that was like, discovering it in your backyard, and also why. Why is it Southern California?
Yeah, I mean, there are, I think, a lot of different centers. Southern California is one of the places, but I think about the U-Lines, which are coming out of the Midwest. I think about Barry Side, who comes out of Chicago. Oh, he donated $1.6 billion with a B, to form the Marble Freedom Trust. They can spend $230+ million every year without touching the nut. He put Leonard Leo in charge of it. Now, Barry Side is Jewish. Leonard Leo is ultra-conservative Catholic. And it just kind of shows the diversity of the funders themselves. I think about like the Corkeries, or I think about the Wilkes brothers and Tim Dunn. These are Texas folks. So there are a lot of different centers. I think Southern California has always had that very conservative element, hasn't it? Especially, Orange County into the south. And perhaps some of that came from the defense industries, or the various industries that developed in those areas.
The John Birch Society.
The John Birch Society. And also Rushdoony. Rusas John Rushdoony. For those of you who don't know who he is, he's a mid-century theologian, a very interesting guy, very bright, actually. He wrote dozens of books, and when I was researching power worshipers, I kind of fell down a Rushdoony rabbit hole. But he's known as a kind of father of Christian Reconstructionism. He came up, the stuff that he says, that he wrote, was really extreme at the time, that a lot of religious right leaders sort of like, well, we don't know him, Rushdoony, we don't know who he is. But you'll hear people like David Barton, who is now critical to this movement, saying some of those same things and those kinds of things that Rushdoony actually, his ideas are really proliferating and are actually quite mainstream in the movement today.
Could you talk a little bit about David Barton? This is veering a little, just because I know that we have people in our community where some of David Barton's teachings and programs are being offered, so it may come up in our circles. Wall builders, yeah.
Wall builders, yeah. Thank you. David Barton is a kind of myth maker, a Christian nationalist myth maker, pseudo-historian. One of his books, he was voted, or one of his books was voted the least credible book in American history by like a bunch of his academic historians. And he published a book called The Jefferson Lies, in which he's trying to reframe what Thomas Jefferson, from whose pen that term, the wall of separation between church and state, flowed. And he was publishing this book with Thomas Nelson Publishing House. It's a Christian publishing house, quite conservative. And they had to, for the first time in their history, retract the book and stop publishing it and they said, oh, it lacks matters of fact. It was just proven to be riddled with errors. But that hasn't stopped David Barton or his fan club, his sort of Christian nationalist fan club, because they need to reframe what America is supposed to be about. They need to reframe the words of our founders in order to pursue a radical agenda that will take our country off in a direction it was never intended to go. Look, I think about founders, people who have been really important in the development of our principles. I think about people like Lincoln and Jefferson and Frederick Douglass and so many others, okay? Their idea has never been that our country should be some kind of kleptocratic dictatorial theocracy. Quite the opposite, But in order to sort of, justify the fact that they're throwing their support behind a narcissistic sociopath would-be dictator and smashing the institutions of government, smashing institutions of value that have served us over time. They really have to reframe what America is all about. And I actually want to hear a little bit right now about your experience, because when you were growing up in Vineyard Church, you had such a visceral experience of being told that,
so I did not grow up in the Conejo Valley. I grew up in Redondo, and I attended a church. My dad, hi Dad, is Jewish, and my mom is an evangelical Christian. And so I would go to temple with my dad, and I'd go to church with my mom. And that's why I ended up studying religion. But it was so I went to primarily Hope Chapel, which is in Hermosa Beach. It used to be called a Foursquare church. Now it's more of a non-denominational but very evangelical church. And I remember from being very young, it was very much drilled into me that, the founding fathers were Christian. This is a Christian country. You know, we need to be the shining city on the hill. And what we need to do as Christians and as citizens is to promote Christian values in society and to, vote according to those values. Typically, those values would align with the Republican Party. And so even though it wasn't stated specifically, you need to vote for this person, it was very, there wasn't really any room for questioning who you were supposed to vote for. So for me, my mom in particular was very involved with anti-abortion issues, Operation Rescue. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but Operation Rescue was, very near and dear to her heart. Randall Terry, I have met. Wendy Wright, who is his top person, used to babysit me. so I was in it. And I was very much, it was very much impressed upon me, even though I was not homeschooled like many of my friends were, that there wasn't really a point in me going to college. I mean, I could go, but I mean, why? You're just going to get married, pop out a couple kids, you're going to homeschool those kids, and, that was the expectation for me. I've never been that kind of a person that wanted all of those things. It's never been like that. That was never my end goal. It was like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, that stuff will happen, but, I want to do things. I want to learn things. And that didn't go over well, I guess. I am now the cautionary tale, so watch it. I'm a corrupting influence. So I ended up getting, I ended up deconstructing from my faith when I was in college. I went to Cal State Long Beach. I have a degree in philosophy and I have a degree in religious studies. And I also decided to get my master's degree in religious studies and study gender and social ethics and all of the things that a good Christian girl's not supposed to study.
Actually, I'm going to just go off topic a little bit, if you don't mind. I mean, it really highlights the fact that why is this administration declaring war on universities? Why are they declaring war on science, on knowledge? Well, quite simply, an educated public is inimical to dictatorial power, So they understand in a way that the truth is their enemy. And I've been, they promote lies constantly, but they're also doing so much to undermine our knowledge, our collective knowledge base as a nation, our collective knowledge base, which is, by the way, a source of so much of our economic support. It's been this huge economic engine. It's made us the enemy of the world, and they're destroying it piece by piece because they understand that an educated public that can understand that policy should be adhere to the facts is inimical to what they want to do with this country. And I have also been in spaces in the course of my research. I remember I was in this a church in West Texas. It was a I would say it was an NAR church. I don't know if any of you guys know what the New Apostolic Reformation is, but it was and part of one of these independent charismatic networks. And the pastor said to a bunch of younger people, well, you can get your education, but then you got to get victory over your education. The idea is don't get too smart.
I had a lot of people, one of the phrases that I heard a lot was, oh, well, you're very intelligent, but you don't have wisdom. And so that becomes a way of kind of undercutting, I feel like it might be a little bit of insecurity, maybe they feel like, oh, I don't know this stuff and therefore I feel bad about it. But also, I don't need to know that stuff because I have permanent, truthful, metaphysical concrete knowledge, and therefore, no matter what you study,
And,
you're always going to be below. You know?
and today we're seeing an all-out war on public education because public education is accountable to governing bodies. It's supposed to be non-sectarian, neither affirming nor denigrating any particular religion. It teaches kids how to get along with others, including those who are different. At its best, it teaches kids critical thinking.
This also veers, but I think it's connected to what we're talking about, which is the way you describe the manufacture of the concept of gender ideology and how it's been used to encompass both abortion and gay rights and transgender identity and the validity of that existence. And you describe it through time in a way that I thought was interesting because it shows the global reach and relationships, and it very much leads into the explosion that we've seen and the way that it's been applied to public education. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh, I mean, so much to say. I will tell you that when, I think it was 2015, the way I do a lot of my research is I go to these spaces, and I was at, I think it was maybe it was a Pray-Vote stand, or maybe it was a Road to Majority, one of the big conferences in Washington, D.C., run by one of the big organizations, either Faith and Freedom Coalition or Family Research Council. And it was, these gatherings are huge. They're like, a couple thousand really important, like, movement leaders and strategists and activists, and then allied politicians will always come to speak. And 2015, I'm always looking for what's different. Every single speaker gets up on the podium and says, on the main stage, and says, we need to talk about transgender bathrooms. I'm like, what's a transgender bathroom? Like, is this a thing? And it turns out they were deciding that they needed to shift because by this point, so many laws, hundreds of laws had passed through the states, chipping away at the right to reproductive rights and chipping away at women's bodily autonomy and families' abilities to make the most intimate and impactful decisions, the most impactful and intimate decisions that they can make. And there's a lot of pushback. And they needed a way to pretend that they're defending women, even as by focusing on this one little issue at the margins that doesn't affect most of us, the overwhelming majority of us. So they're pretending that they're defending women, even as they're taking away our most fundamental rights. And I actually think that that's the reason for that massive shift. So when I went to America Fest, that gathering in Phoenix, Arizona, that Charlie Kirk and his people put on, I would say 2 out of 3 speakers spoke about the issue of transgender women playing on women's sports teams. Now, the head of the NCAA, which is like the governing sports body for, I think it's college athletics, said there are 10 transgender identified athletes out of 520,000. 10 out of 525,000. Is this really the issue we should be focusing on? I mean, America's facing a lot of problems. Kids are facing a lot of problems. Gun violence is the #1 cause of death among children and adolescents in this country. It's an absolute disgrace. I think it's 20% of children are living in poverty, or might even be a larger number. I mean, we're facing some really consequential problems. But I think of that particular issue as like a laser point, like a laser pointer cat toy. Those little cat things, the cat jumps at it. It has to do with sexuality. Everybody looks, but then they don't see the bigger picture. So my view is like, however you feel about that issue or I feel about that issue, it is not the issue. They are focusing on it because they don't want us to look at all the other stuff that we're doing.
Why do you think it's been so effective, though? Because we have seen that be a point that has landed with, especially these sort of infantry groups that you describe in a way that, for example, critical race theory didn't have the staying power.
They talk about it non-stop. That's why And they stopped talking about CRT, but then now they talk about DEI, which is, again, a form of, race baiting, really. So.
That you can't see it. It's kind of small. There's a little bubble down below. It says Godspeed Calvary. She's a big donor to them. Like, I think about $100,000 in her last numbers that came out. And then it's not on there, but she did donate $10,000 to Jeff Gorell, our Ventura County Board of Supervisors. And I just want you guys to know there's an election coming up next year. 255
over 4 years, but significant.
I think one of the things that you had written about in your book was, oh, sorry. In your book you had talked about 4 mindsets or elements of Christian nationalism that make it a political identity rather than a religion. Would you be able to elaborate on those things?
Of course. So first, this apocalypticism, the sense that we are facing an absolute apocalypse thanks to the rise of secularists or liberals or the woke elite or anyone who's remotely not on board with their agenda. Rhinos even fall into this category, but we're all characterized as woke communists or something like that. The consequences of loss in the political arena are too dire to ignore. We're going to go under the thumb of Satan or the Illuminati for thousands. I've literally heard this kind of thing said at right-wing conferences. So this idea that we're facing this cliff, things are so bad, just terrible. The true righteous Americans are going to be forced into Marxist struggle sessions, and everybody's going to have to change their gender against their will or something like that. So that's apocalypticism. And you hear that apocalypticism, that sense of apocalypse, that sense of a permanent emergency all the time. Then, of course, there's a sense of course, identity politics. We, the righteous, are the true Americans. They, the unrighteous, are, don't really belong, don't properly belong, or are sometimes described as satanic or demonic. I've been to gatherings where you hear democratic organizations described as demonic organizations.
It's happening at school board meetings, too.
It's happening. Oh, it's very sad. So with the identity politics, a grievance, the sense of persecution narrative, we can think of a lot of people in society who suffer from some form of discrimination. Movement leaders and people sort of in that movement can describe only one group of folks, and that is themselves. They believe they are the most persecuted group in society, or at least they say they are. And, thanks to this sort of horrible woke elite that's going to send us over the cliff. And that, all of these 3 sort of mindsets clears the way for an authoritarian leader, a strong man, who's going to suspend the rule of law in favor of the iron fist and defeat this awful woke mob that's about to, send our country into eternal destruction. And so they want to suspend the rule of law really in favor of the iron fist.
Excuse me. You were talking about how one of the writers is attacking progressive Christianity. And I keep track of this whole realm. I read it all the time, read the feeds. And what I've noticed is, I've been involved in the progressive Christian movement nationally for 25 years. 25 years ago, this world that you're describing ignored us. Thought we were a bunch of, dying out churches, meaningless heretics, who cares, who cares about these guys? Today, and this is the irony for us that I'd like you to address, part of the irony is there's a tremendous depopulation of evangelical and fundamentalist churches. People are leaving, and they're showing up in this church, right, as they exit. So the right-wing Christian world is suddenly paying attention to our movement in a way they never did before. They're calling us agents of Satan. You know, Billy Graham's daughter talks about us. It's the best publicity our movement has ever had. Seriously, because the people who are reading it, some of them are going, maybe I'm done with this whole Trumpist religion, and these are the people I can go to when I leave. So it's this really interesting new situation, and I'd love to see what your angle is on this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think the whole idea that the movement is shrinking it's complicated because the movement is drawing new energy from independent charismatic networks, which are both multiracial and also transnational movements. So at some of the gatherings that I've attended, they have become, over the time, the 16 years I've been following this movement, they've become more racially diverse. I mean, think about between 2016 and still, white evangelicals are the most reliable slice of, I would say, the MAGA movement voters for sure. But the movement is drawing in a sector of ultra-conservative Catholics, a sector of Pentecostals and neo-charismatics, and certainly the leadership is, the leadership and also the funders are diversifying as well. So it's very interesting. I did, Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA is effective at recruiting young people to the movement. And I know you're leading youth groups on college campuses, and I'd love to have a conversation with you at some point about what that looks like.
I know that we want to open it up to questions. Though, just the next slide, I just wanted to point out these are 3 events happening in the next couple of weeks around Southern California, and they give you a sense of the level of intensity and the presence of these national organizations. So I think a good idea for anyone who cares about this to pay attention to the types of training and recruitment events that are happening, the pastors that are present and speaking, and it, I think, just very much ties into basically every group that you talked about is represented on these 3 slides, with new ones that might be local. So I just wanted to make sure that I called that out before we sort of close on these key takeaways and open it up to other questions. But I did love that you ended with this hopeful note, and I just wanted to ask, do you still feel that hope post-publication, post-inauguration, post-100 days?
Well, I always say, I'm not optimistic or pessimistic, I'm determined. But I think hope is in action. I think one of the wonderful things about this gathering is that, those of us, I think more Americans want to live in a democracy than some kind of cronyistic, kleptocratic autocracy with theocratic features. And there are things we can do as individuals, and there's even more that we can do when we join together with others. And I know there are a lot of folks in this room who are engaged in different kinds of pro-democracy work, and that's encouraging to me. So I'd love to open this up for questions. And each of these points, by the way, I elaborate more in my book at the end of Money, Lies, and God. And I apologize, I don't have books to sell here, but you can buy them anywhere books are sold.
There's actually a QR code on the back table. You can scan it, and it'll lead you to buy her new book. Yeah.
I have a question. My understanding is that the Good News Club is in Ventura County. And I believe I heard it had shown up at least one school in Conejo. Is that true? And Ojai. What is the best way to counter that? My understanding is the schools can't say no to them if they're coming in and, because they have to offer it to everybody. How can we Do we put out flyers that we hand out on the streets to informing parents who they really are? What do we do?
That's a really challenging question because the Good News Club is in public schools thanks to a 2001 Supreme Court decision called Good News Club versus Milford Central School. It was one of the decisions, key decisions, that the right-wing legal movement has pursued to sideline the Establishment Clause and actually eviscerate it by reinterpreting religion as nothing more than speech from a certain point of view. So they say, so all these activities should be allowed in public schools because of the free speech clause. Well, is religion just like speech, like any other? Well, not according to our tax code. Religions have a very special place in our tax code. They're allowed to, they have special things like parsonage exemptions and other kinds of tax advantages. They don't have to open their books to the IRS to show how the money was spent. Religion isn't just like any other group in our legal code. Religions are allowed to discriminate against women, against people of other faiths, against LGBT Americans. But when they want to get into the public schools on the same basis as a soccer club, they say, we're just like anybody else. We're just an after-school club like anybody else. But when they want their privileges and their tax exemptions and their lack of transparency, they say, oh, no, we're a religion. So we have all this special. So they're really trying to have their cake and eat it too. Now, I know this doesn't answer your question, but I think knowledge is power. We need to understand why they're there, how they were put there, who put them there, and what part of the right-wing legal strategy they have secured in order to help secure additional parts of legal strategy. I mean, a longer-term solution is there's nothing like the ballot box. We need to understand that elections are not just about the individuals running, they're about judges. And the right knows that. In advance of the 2016 and 2024 elections, I would go to right-wing conferences and people would say, this election is about judges, judges, judges. And so I think, the right-wing legal movement has turned civil rights on its head and is in the process of totally eviscerating the Establishment Clause, which, by the way, has the best piece of real estate in our Constitution. It is the very first piece of the very first clause of the very first amendment. Our founders didn't put it there, for no reason. It's vital. It's essential, principle, foundational to our democracy. So we need to, I think, in a long-term strategy, and this is going to be a generational struggle. Have some kind of political leadership. You'll appoint judges that will really restore the meaning of the Establishment Clause and restore our democracy. Now, in the short term, what can you do as an individual? I mean, knowledge still is power. I think it's really important that a lot of parents don't understand what the Good News Club really stands for and what they're teaching. I'm a parent, public school parent. We need after-school stuff for our kids, and a lot of parents think, it's just Bible study, for a non-denominational standpoint, it sounds kind of nice, and they think about their own Sunday school, and they think, well, it's such a convenient setting, and I get an extra hour, I can do a little more work, or maybe unload the dishwasher. But they don't really get the extremism at the heart of this organization and its larger agenda.
Imagine to respond by saying that on Monday it's Good Sharia Club. Can't go to that too.
Well, the irony is that, when they talk about how persecuted they are, when they came to our public school, there was a woman who is a member of a religion that gets a lot of negative publicity, and she said, can you imagine if she was actually a Latter-day Saint. I mean, she said, if we were doing this, it would be all over the national news. She was really upset,
Yeah. I just want to add that there is a Good News Club at, it's either Acacia Elementary or Aspen. Is it Acacia? Thank you. Yeah, Acacia in Conejo Valley, USD. So,
Yeah. Hi, I'm Steve. I had the fortune of growing up as the son of a public school teacher who also went to the United Church of Christ, so we were a pretty progressive family. And I think that gives me a basis to look at many of these other religions and see the religious zealotry and the power that it has. And I remember as a kid in the 70s and my dad pointing out that this is exactly what was going to happen. And that was based largely on trying to strangle funding for public schools. And it's very, very difficult to fight something that is actually not real. And how do we as a group come together in the way that these religious zealots have corralled the American public so that we can have the same amount of power and organization as they do to fight back? Because honestly, it's been a lucky 50 years of haphazard fighting with liberal values, and we need to figure out how to become organized, how to make it something that we want to do, that we devote time to, and that we think is very valuable, and that we can convince others is very valuable to spend their time doing. Most people would not go spend a week at a non-religious convention, right? It's the religious aspect of this that really drives people. How do we fight that?
Thank you. I mean, there's a lot we can do. There are a lot of pro-democracy organizations out there. I can't tell everybody in this room exactly what they should do. But we all have spheres of influence. I think, do a little research. When you buy a pair of shoes, you don't go to the store and just buy the first pair of shoes you see. You do a little research. You spend a little bit of time figuring it out. I mean, there are people in this room who are doing incredible pro-democracy work. You guys are doing pro-democracy work. I mean, it's impressive. So, yeah, really excited to be here. These wonderful women are doing so much.
We got one more question. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say join Speakeasy.
Oh, yeah, come join us. There's a mailing list up there if you guys want to put your email.
Hello, I'm Ben. So I was thinking a lot about Chris Hedges and American Fascists. I don't know if you've read that or familiar with his work. But it seems like there's a hope in democracy, but at the same time, democracy did give us Trump. And one of the things that Hedges writes about is how our society went from a literate-based society to a image-based society. So democracy is predicated on literacy. So if we now have a society that is, like George Carlin said, dumbed down, I think there are a lot of people that look to Trump as a messianic kind of religious cult figure, and he's not speaking to the rational mind. He's speaking to emotions. He's speaking to unconscious rage, whatever. So I was thinking about what you were saying, like these funders who they're not religious at all. They're not spiritual. It's pure cynicism. So I see Trump doing the same thing. So I wonder, how can we get back to democracy when there were millions of people who willingly voted for Trump, but they voted for him not from a rational standpoint, but from this emotional, religious kind of cult position. So I guess what I'm wondering is, aside from just we need more education, what do you see is the way to overcome this kind of, because Trump's a symptom, right? He figured it out. He changed the game in a way that others may emulate or perfect or even become a Trump 2.0. So I guess I don't think once Trump is aged out and he's gone, there'll be someone else, right? So how do we get past this in a way where, I don't know, I feel like millions of people voted for him and they're going to vote for someone else the same way too. And it wouldn't be a rational vote, and it's going to happen again, perhaps.
Well, I hear your frustration. Thank you so much for articulating that. I think a lot of us feel that. I will say that Trump didn't win on images, he won on lies. He said a lot of lies to the American people, but it wasn't just him. It was that whole network. Oh, sorry, the mic is off. And I also want to say that, I don't have a crystal ball, but I am seeing a lot of disenchantment with the chaos, the mismanagement, the fact that Americans are losing government functions and services that they need and want and deserve, that I think we have a real opportunity as needless trade wars rise the price of goods, as people lose their jobs, as they lose their health care, their Medicare, their Social Security, as children, that children lose their funding for special education, just to give one example. This is, public ed is dear to my heart, and eliminating the Department of Education, I think a lot of people who voted for Trump, they think that sounds good. As soon as it affects their kids' school, most of them still attend public schools, they're going to say, wait a second. I think we're already seeing, a sort of loss of support among rural Americans. I think there is a real opportunity for us to say, here are the people who did this to you, and these are the people who are fighting for you. I think that there's a wonderful piece I read recently in Politico by a journalist from Turkey who advised Americans to learn from pro-democracy movements in other countries that had experienced autocracy. And she had a few takeaways. This is another one. I think we need a big tent. We can't purity test one another. Those of us who believe in democracy, we're not going to agree on everything. And when I say those of us, I'm talking about like some conservatives and moderates and liberals and progressives and members of the left. It's like a big, noisy family, a family with 10 kids. Does everybody get everything they want? Absolutely not. But if we can agree on more than we disagree on, then we can work together. And we're not going to get everything we want. We probably shouldn't get everything we want and have to learn how to compromise with one another. But, in the right is divided, like really divided. And those divisions can be highlighted and exploited, and they should be.
Thank you. We have 3 more questions, so.
Hi, I'm Heather. I think I'm just going to give us encouragement, and you're so amazing. One thing that I've noticed that is very efficient in the Conejo Valley, I loathe Rob McCoy. Oh, am I not working? One thing I found really effective to do is to push him into the corner he needs to be in. And I called 2 or 3 churches last week. I talked to one. I'm trying to see if the youth pastor is here. I don't think he is. I called our local churches and asked them if they teach Christian nationalism to our students. And the one church called me back. I sent an email and just said, hey, I'm curious about what you're teaching my child. And when he called me back, I asked him what he knew about Christian nationalism. And he was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I said, well, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then how do I know that you're not teaching? Like, if you don't know it, how do I know you're not teaching it? So it was very awkward. He got off the phone in 2 seconds. But I think it is really important for those of us to go into our community and literally push your Christian nationalism pastor to the margins. Because in churches, people who go to church have been sold that, God's going to provide this and God's going to provide that. Well, when you go into a recession, they need to know, no, actually, Heather, who hates Donald Trump and MAGA, paid for your childcare and brought you food and brought you groceries. And those crazy people over there that brought us this, I think it is very important to name it and tell them, you are MAGA, you are QAnon, and you are crazy. And to be bold. I mean, this pastor got off the phone with me, and I have good street cred with this church. Brad's, my husband's dad, was a president of the Bible college they went to. We went there. This was a person I could build a bridge with, and he was like, yeah, bye. And so to divide churches, to say these are good churches, these are crazy churches, I think that is online, get loud and let people know, name them and don't hold back. Rob McCoy is a crazy, awful man who is ruining your child. And then the other big church in our community doesn't know what to do with that. Because are you on Team Rob McCoy or are you not? Like, we need to divide the good church. Well, you're not even in that realm. Anyway.
Thank you so much. I think you never win over people by calling them like crazy or stupid. I mean, there's an opportunity to meet people where they are. I think there really is, because, you know, I go into these spaces, and a lot of the people I meet, even though they're really heavily into this movement, a lot of them are really good people. They love their families, they really care about their communities, they really truly believe they're doing what's best for our country. But all of their sincere efforts have been harnessed in service of an agenda that's dividing our country, making it weaker, not stronger, and has brought us to a real crisis point. But I think there is the opportunity to actually meet people where they are and to just listen, find common ground, slowly introduce new information, and sort of connect on a human level. And those aren't, those, some, you know, yeah, sometimes you're going to, you know, bash your head against the wall for, you know, maybe a decade trying to, you know, get somebody to see things in a different way, but sometimes those conversations can be really generative.
I just want to add that Heather, who just spoke, she, there was a big protest we had a couple weeks ago, and there was an anti-abortion activist there. He was in a crowd of many. He was one guy in a crowd of many. Heather took him out to lunch afterwards. She took,
that's so cool.
She did, and she had like it was an amazing story. Yeah. Oh, you did. I know
Thank
she
you.
tried to get him to come. Okay.
So this is actually not a question, it's a statement of gratitude. This is my first time at this church. So I wanted to thank the author and the panelists for this fantastic discussions. I learned a lot. And I also want to thank the church and the pastor for providing this environment and supporting the forum so we could have these productive, these discussions, which
Thank you for being here.
Which I believe is an important, not the only, an important element of transitioning from money, lies, and God to money, truth, and God.
Hi. First of all, thank you for being here. It's like seeing a celebrity because we have discussed your work we've discussed your work quite a bit. This is somewhat of a comment, so I hope it's okay. It's a statement, like just taking in everything you said, and some of the amazing women and organizers and pastors, and like sharing some of our successes from this past year based on these takeaways in case it's helpful for anybody else. Like, to answer the question, what do we do? To me, one of the most important things that we're doing is, like, we are in this room having this discussion right now, and I'm sure there are people in this room who are in book clubs. And in your sphere of influence, like, it's a great time to look at books like this or Shadow Network, or, you know, like, get those conversations going. Another thing that's been really helpful, like, Heather, as you were talking about just reaching out to the community, I know, like, letters to the editor are important. Next door is important. Like, all the personal conversations are important. And one thing that you identified that's so good is naming it. And when you can name the nature of the attack, when you have the power worshipers, when you have money, lies, and God, when you have someone who has mapped this out for you, being able to say, hey, there's this thing coming to your school, and it's the Good News Club, and it's bad faith. You don't have to engage on, like to just name it as the attack it is so helpful. And then people go, wait a minute, I do respect all the humans here, and I want to have the conversation here. And when I see it as an outside thing, as a Rob McCoy thing, it's been incredibly helpful. But more than anything else, I feel like the media has let us down this year. And so we're our own people, and finding like locals who can provide that information. But really, I just hope you take this all to all your book clubs. That's all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, one more question, and then we got to wrap it up.
I'm trying to make it good. So this is a legal question, really, but the answer is probably going to be no. So then the question really is it worth pursuing this as a legal strategy? So the Good News Club holds meetings on school grounds. Would a third party, like a parent, have a legal right to attend these meetings?
That's a really good question. I did attend Good News Club meetings when they came to our daughter's public elementary school. I have heard other parents say they've been excluded, but some parents I know have attended them. It might vary on the school policy. I'm just really not sure.
Really, I'm suggesting that's a legal policy that you can pursue in the courts.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, then I guess the question is, if the court is now treating Good News, these religious clubs, on the same basis as a soccer club, would a parent have a right to attend a soccer practice? There might be concerns if they don't have a child in that program. Does that make sense? And I could see why that might be a legitimate concern. But I don't know, and might vary on school policy. And it also might vary on the sort of whatever the folks who are running that particular school happen to want. But so it's a good question.
Well, I think this is a long conversation, and it's been amazing. I just want to thank you guys so much for coming up here and sitting up here and talking.
Thank you. Thank you so much for organizing. You guys are amazing. Thank you, Laura. And thanks to all of you for being here.
I guess there's coffee and stuff in the back. I really, really do encourage you to get Catherine's book. There's a QR code in the back. Like I said, you can purchase it there. There's a QR code right there. You can snap a picture. We need to support authors like this who are putting this work out there. So, thank you. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pastor Jim Burklow. Thank you so much for your venue and all your crew.